Hey guys, WRIOTHESLEY is rerunning, so I want to make a video about it. And I know that sounds crazy because this is actually his first rerun. He came out in version 4.1 and he hasn't run for almost 500 days, which is wild because there's characters that have came out since then and have rerun already, like Clorand or Arlecchino. But yeah, because it's been such a long time, there is quite a few new things and things I didn't know about him, which I thought makes a good video. And I usually don't make guides on characters I don't play much or I don't own. But with WRIOTHESLEY, we've been playing him a lot this past week, these past 2 weeks, on stream, doing calcs, doing gameplay testing. And also, honestly, WRIOTHESLEY is one of those less covered characters. I know if you're a WRIOTHESLEY main, it's probably hard to find that much videos or content, guides about him. And I've had a really fun time playing him recently. So what I want to focus this video on is debates that I've heard. For example, the topic we can start off with is how good is his C1, because sometimes you hear some people say his C1 is so good and it's almost essential, and other times, like especially recently, I have heard a lot of theory crafters say that his C1 is overrated and it's not actually that good, which does sound quite crazy to me because you see how popular his C1 is, especially with WRIOTHESLEY main. So that's something I wanted to investigate. So for starters, what does his C1 actually do? Well, first of all, what his C0 kit is, basically he spams normal attacks and charge attacks, and he has this talent here where if he loses quite a bit of HP, he gains this rebuke which buffs his charge attack and makes it not consume stamina. Now that sounds good, but what happens is most people play him in melt teams with Bennett, so it's actually quite hard for him to drop below that HP. So what happens with C0 is you don't really get to benefit from that talent. You don't really get buffed charge attacks. So what happens is, what people normally do when they play C0 is you do 3 normal attacks and then you do a charge attack. And that's sort of the combo that you do. Whereas with C1, he kind of plays around that and you automatically get the rebuke buff. If you do his full normal string, his full 5 normal attacks, you get it. And not only are you guaranteed that, but the damage bonus goes from being originally 50% damage increase to 200. So it's quite nice. And instead, you do something like that. So that is what we're calculating. We're comparing something like an N3C, maybe with a jump attack, versus an N5C with usually a dash. So to cut a long story short, we spent a few hours on stream calcing, doing all these damage calcs, and the craziest thing is, which might make no sense, but you can actually get the C0 combo doing more damage than the C1 combo. And like I said, you might think this makes no sense. So there were viewers in my chat who also did their calcs, and yeah, it turns out you actually can get the C0 combo doing more than a C1. Well, to cut a long story short, why is that? Well, it's because the C0 combo, if everything goes perfect, essentially you just get more hits in. So that's how it goes. So even with WRIOTHESLEY getting those huge buffs, when he drops below the HP with his charge attack, it doesn't deal that much enough damage to compensate and make it a guaranteed increase. But here's the thing, even though I did those calcs, the calcs are kind of sus. The calcs kind of assume a perfect scenario. But what is the point of this calc? This is such a waste of time. I literally got C0 doing 10,000 more damage, but it's not real. So what's the point? WRIOTHESLEY's kind of similar to Hu Tao, if that explains things better. And getting off this optimal C0 combo, often you actually need to jump and you can't dash at all, or you run out of stamina. Doing that in practice, honestly, is quite impractical. And you mustn't also forget that a lot of the time, WRIOTHESLEY's most popular teams, whether you're playing a team like this, or maybe you're playing some sort of arena team, some sort of Emily team, a lot of these teams don't have shields and don't have interrupt resistance, which means you can't just stand there jump cancelling and never dashing. So it's worth noting that, because it's not quite like Hu Tao. With Hu Tao, you'd pretty much always get an increase with C1 just because you get more hits in, whereas with WRIOTHESLEY it kind of comes down to achieving the best combo with C1 is more consistent, more realistic than achieving the best combo with C0. But now that's not it, because there is a second part into this equation, and it's also relevant for the rerun, which is that WRIOTHESLEY has new teams. You can get the N3C combos with Xilonen. However, a lot of you might have noticed that if you're playing Mavuika as your pyro teammate, say for example in a team like this, well actually Mavuika's pyro app isn't as good as Xilolen's, and you can't actually do the N3C combos and melt consistently. So what often happens with Mavuika is you have to do the N5C combo anyway, because Mavuika just doesn't have enough pyro up. So in that case, I did calculate, okay, if you're forced to do N5C, his full string, what is the difference between C0 and C1? And this is what I got, around 17%. I've seen some people get around 20%, somewhere around that. So to answer the question, you can actually tie it back in multiple ways. So you could say C1 is overrated because it's not always a damage increase, it's more of a quality of life increase. But you could also say it could potentially be overrated, as somewhere between a 16 to 20% damage increase might not be as big of an increase as getting a signature. For example, these calcs here, it can be bigger if you're having certain 4 stars. So either way you look at it, I guess you could say C1 is overrated in terms of damage. However, I personally would say that is too idealistic of a conclusion, and the quality of life you get from the C1, I don't know if that is underrated. It's kind of similar to Hu Tao, but not really. For example, if you have the Widsith and Wriothesley at C0, I would just stick with the Widsith and I would get his C1 first. It's kind of similar with Neuvillette, where you can get scenarios where Neuvillette's signature weapon, upgrading to that is a bigger theoretical damage increase than going from his C0 to C1. But you know how it turns out, almost everyone gets the C1 first, because not only is it a good damage increase, but the quality of life is very nice. Okay, but there still is one other factor, which is why I'm not sure his C1 is overrated. And you can make the argument that, like, what else would you get? But because a lot of these melt teams don't have very good energy, so I would hesitate putting Xilonen on peak patrol. I find I always run into energy issues. I'd rather just keep her on Fav. And if you want to get an improvement with Xilonen's constellations, you're gonna have to just go straight to her C2. So that's 2 constellations. Xiangling and Bennett are both also good to go at quite budget investments. Now you could get Mavuika, and then I guess you could get Mavuika's weapon after. But barring that, I mean, you're only looking at investment in Wriothesley. And the thing is, his weapon's pretty good, but also his C1's pretty good. If you're looking to invest in your Wriothesley team, like, why not? Why not go for his weapon? Why not save up for his C1? It's not like there is a lot of supports to invest into. His teams can be quite simple. And a good way to demonstrate that is, say, for example, if you look at a Neuvillette team, there are so many things you can invest into. You can invest into his constellations, his weapons. For Venus constellations, you could get Xilonen. You could get all sorts of stuff. So in that situation, you're kind of spoiled for choice, and then you do have to consider what is actually good. Whereas I think for Wriothesley, he has less things to invest into. So hopefully that was helpful. Maybe that helped you decide if you want to go for a C1 or his weapon. The second thing I learned, and you may or may not know this already, Yujin is in our Discord community and they made this video recently. And Wriothesley has some fun things you can learn, some fun text to basically store his combo. And yeah, shout out to Yujin for showing me this. Usually, whenever the white thing goes from his gloves, you end up resetting your combo, which can be quite annoying because, like, as we said before, especially if you have C1, a lot of his damage can come from the massive charge attack here. But check this out. Do you see that? I literally did that first try. What you can do is if you hold a direction just before you press a normal, it kind of stores the combo. And that's quite a fun thing to practice. It's like a nice party trick. You can wait. Boom! That's quite fun. And the best tip I can give you to learn this is you don't tap the direction and then press the button. Otherwise you'll just get stuff like that. I find you have to hold the direction just before you press your normal attack button. Whilst that looks cool, you might be wondering what the practical usage is for this. And to be honest, I'm not a dedicated Wriothesley main. I don't know all the scenarios where this is that good, but I think this is quite useful when you solo. Maybe not as useful in an actual team setting, but for example here, Yujin just shows a bit of flashy techniques here. It's just a way you can consistently finish his combo and get the final moves. And even if you don't actually end up using it in game, I think it's a fun thing to learn. But there probably is a few scenarios where that's quite useful. Anyway, so if you guys want to practice that and then let me know how you get on, that'd be quite fun. Also remember, in practice, there's 3 ways you can approach this charge attack. You can either just do nothing, don't cancel it at all, or you can dash cancel. But again, dash cancelling is a bit sus with C0. You can run out of stamina. or you can jump cancel. Now a lot of Rysley mains say they do that, but for me personally, I don't know how often I can actually get away with a jump cancel, especially in a lot of these teams I play. They don't have shields. Anyway, moving on to the third discussion, which is teams, and that's because there has been quite a few teammates released since Rysley first came out in 4.1. I will say, whether you're looking at casual usage rate surveys or you're looking at speed ones, Bennett is kind of always used, so that really hasn't changed. But there are a few teams that I would recommend at the moment, either a Xilonen team like this, or a Xilonen team with Mavuika, or you can play Farina Xiangling. You can do Emily Xiangling. Anyway, you're probably wondering which supports are the strongest for him. And again, one of the common things you always hear is the debate, is Farina better, is Xilonen better? You might see that most speed runs use Xilonen, but you might also see that theoretically Farina is slightly higher DPS. And the thing is, I would actually say, in general, if you're someone who watches this video, you're probably a Rysley main. You're probably dedicated, which means you probably have higher investment than what a calculation would assume. So if I had to give an answer, I'd probably say Xilonen is a bit better. Now, why is that? What I think is important to realize is with Farina, because she's a sub DPS and she also steals some reactions, the damage is more spread out. Whereas with Xilonen, you're focusing a lot on melting Rysley's hits. And I think one of the most helpful ways of looking at this is you could use the sim, and you could use the sim to check damage distribution. For example, there's one here where he's doing 52% of the team's damage, and another one here where he's doing 46% of the team's damage. Now again, as I always say, basically how calcs work, I guess you could say that calculations use lower standards than what you might have. For example, level 9 talents, the artifacts are also capped at a specific level of substats. And without overcomplicating it, I can just show you a few stuff with Xilonen. You can see here Ryze is doing 76% of the team's damage. This one is doing 81, and this last one here 85. Now why am I showing this? I'm showing this because even though theoretically, if you look at a set baseline, you can get Farina team having slightly higher DPS. The thing is, in teams with Xilonen without Farina, the more investment you have in your Rysley, the more damage you gain. And this is not just about constellations. It's not just about constellations, it's not just about weapons. It could also be about your artifacts. For example, every crit substat you get, you're gaining more DPS in the Xilonen teams than you are with the Farina teams. And like I said, I think that's important to know, because the reality with calcs is, although calcs are very useful for what they are, if you're a main of specific characters, if you're dedicated to them, if you're building them, you're trying to get them the best you can be, even if you're not pulling a bunch of constellations, in general, you are probably going to have better investment than the calc standard. Now, let's not say Farina is bad. I played both of them. I got good performance out of both of them when I was testing. But if you're a Rysley main, I would lean towards Xilonen. Now, the next thing you're probably wondering is Mavuika worth getting over Xiangling? Like what we said earlier in the C1 section, Mavuika has less pyro app. So you're going to have a hard time doing these N3C combos, trying to get a lot of charge attacks in. You're going to have issues, whereas it's much more smoother if you do this full combo and only melt charge attacks at the end. It's hard to say Mavuika's a definitive upgrade at C0, especially if your Mavuika isn't highly invested. Whilst I don't think she's a clear upgrade over Xiangling just because there's a bit of the melt scarf, but I think she potentially is a small upgrade. I haven't done extensive calcs comparing these two. It's quite hard to calc it, but for my gameplay testing, you could make the argument that Mavuika is not even just a side grade, but at the very least an okay upgrade over Xiangling. Now, that might not be the case if you don't have her signature or you don't have something like Serpent Spine, whereas with Xiangling the catch is free, so it could depend on your level of investment. It could also depend on your Rysley's investment, because you kind of have to do N5C on Rysley. That makes his C1 just a straight upgrade, whereas with Xiangling it's a bit more situational and more of a quality of life thing. But it is important to know that you probably can't really do Farina and Mavuika, because Mavuika's pyro app is not good enough. At that point, it's just a mess. Lastly, Emily also came out just before Natlin, and these teams are quite popular, especially a team like this. It's quite popular for casual play. But as far as damage, from what I tested and from what other Rysley mains in my community tested, Emily does feel comfortable to play, don't get me wrong. I got some smooth clears, I was doing a lot of testing, and it was pretty comfortable to play. But strictly in terms of damage, because Emily is basically purely a sub DPS, and especially in a lot of these teams, burning isn't really helping your Wriothesley get any more melts. So Emily's kind of just here with sub DPS, so it's kind of similar to Farina's situation, except Farina's giving buffs whereas Emily isn't, which is that the Emily teams don't really scale that well with the investment. So I think Emily's more of like a tech option, where if you do have her, you can slot her into Wriothesley teams. Say for example you're fighting enemies where burning benefits, like Papilla when you want to get the hit count and burning really helps, or you've got shields that can be broken easy with Dendro. There's loads of reasons where you could play Emily, but going for her specifically for your Wriothesley, if you don't already have her, I don't really recommend, when I'd rather save for Xilonen, for example. And yeah, last team before we finish, I know there is kind of a meme team which I tested where you play Seat Lully and then you melt Mavuika's burst and then you attack on Wriothesley after. Obviously in this team there's a lot of cryo app, there's not enough pyro app. I tested it, it was pretty good. I don't think it was the best Wriothesley team though, mostly because I think if you're using Mavuika for her off-field damage and you're not melting Wriothesley charge attacks, I think it's just kind of a waste. And the main value in that team is that you're melting Mavuika's burst, but after that I don't think the team is really that effective. Anyway, that's it for this video. I don't want to cover stuff like weapons because a lot of that stuff hasn't really changed. But let me know if you're playing Wriothesley, let me know if you found this video helpful. I think he's a pretty fun character to play. I know he's also popular solo. A lot of people don't even use teams with him. I also played him solo and managed to clear the abyss. And yeah, thanks for watching.